All right, this lecture is Chapter 9, Lecture number 3, and we'll begin by talking about agriculture and agricultural regions in India. Then we'll talk about industry in India, and then urban India. This map of agricultural regions of India from page 427 of your text shows the variety of agriculture that is predominant in regions throughout India. Let's start to the east and the mountains, where we see shifting agriculture typical of what you would see in a tropical environment. Slash and burn agriculture, where the majority of the nutrients are not held in the soil because they're leached out due to the high temperatures and high amount of rainfall. Therefore, the majority of the minerals in this environment are maintained in the vegetation, and when the vegetation is cut and allowed to burn, those nutrients are released into the soil for a period of time, allowing for a short period of agriculture of a year or two. When that nutrient base has been used up, the vegetation is allowed to return to natural species, and a new plot is cleared, burned, and agriculture is started again. Also in this region, in the lower elevations, we find tea is very common crop being grown. In the lower flat elevations of East India, we also see significant area of rice due to the available water for irrigation. Also, in eastern India, we see large regions of rice to the south and to the west of the Ganges River region and Damodar River regions. Rice is also predominant in the far south and the southeast coast as well. In the south, we see regions where coconut groves predominate agriculture, and also some tropical type regions where shifting agriculture occurs. As we move up to the center of the plateau, we see grains more common, millet, wheat, and some corn. As we move to the north, we have regions of chickpea, which is a common crop as we go further north. And we also see a region of peanuts in the drier far west portion of India. We have a region of rice growing as well on the border with Pakistan on the tributaries of the Indus River. Agricultural development in India, 62% of the population is engaged in some form of agricultural pursuits, and 65% of the population live in rural villages and small towns. Spatial distribution of the population and the density of that population is, as we've seen over and over again, determined by the availability of water. There is a heavy reliance on livestock, both for dairy products, milk, yogurt is common, and cattle are the primary source of power for plowing and for short distance transportation. Agricultural development in India. Sources of rural poverty are many. There is a lack of health access and other public services. There is very low levels of education in the rural areas of India. There's lack of meaningful land reform, as the average size of household plots is only 6.5 acres, not enough for even subsistence farming, and definitely not for commercial farming. There's been the negative impact of the Green Revolution, negative impact of government economic policies. There's been a technological impact due to the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution has not solved many of the agricultural problems, and in fact has exacerbated the economic inequities. So let's consider these reasons a little bit more deeply for India's persistent low agricultural productivity and rural poverty. As rural India becomes increasingly modernized, will the poor people who live in rural India be able to reap the benefits? Probably not. Two of the reasons for India's persistent low agricultural productivity and rural poverty are the lack of access that rural people have to the components of modernization, especially education, which would allow them to apply better technology to their farming. There's also the lure of perceived opportunities in urban areas. That lure, though, also requires a certain level of education that rural people find they don't have if they indeed migrate to these urban areas. The access problem dates back to at least the organization of rural people in territory by the British to accommodate mercantilism and colonialism. As is always the case, the lack of education that helps people develop their ideas and talents, that lack of education will stifle development as it can be broadly defined. Until India's rural people have access to that kind of education, they will be unable to improve themselves and their rural communities. And their opportunities are also diminished should they succeed to migrate to an urban area. The current modernization of agriculture in rural India is the supplanting of agriculture by agribusiness. Agriculture involves the work of local culture in rural communities. Agribusiness does not. This type of modernization marginalizes rural people and their communities and results in loss of work for the local culture that is capable of sustaining agricultural resources, what is also known as natural capital. And that will, in the long run, be diminished by agribusiness. The slums of India's cities will continue to fill with rural migrants who are just as ill-educated to participate in the urban economic functions as they are in rural modernization. So does agricultural modernization require the destruction of rural life? We might see the answer to these questions as we continue to observe the agriculture development in rural India. This map from page 431 shows the primary mineral and industrial regions of South Asia as a whole. We see Colombo has probably the largest industrial base in Sri Lanka, but this is basically evolved around textiles. The Chennai region in South India has significant industry as well as a small amount of oil. There's small amounts of oil on the east coast in the Bay of Bengal, and coal also in some of the remote regions of the central east portion of India. Kolkata is a decaying industrial zone. The Damodar River used to provide a fair amount, and still does, of clean energy through hydroelectric power, but coal is still the predominant source of energy. Many of these factories are run down, have not been modernized, and industry has been decaying in this particular industrial zone over the past couple of decades. We see a small amount of oil in Bangladesh and in East India, as well as some coal here as well. We see copper in Nepal, as well as iron. We have the Mumbai, or what the region formerly known as Bombay, a region that manufactures textiles as well as automobile parts. Small oil reserve off the coast there. And in Central East India, we find all right, and then we have a small industrial region around Delhi, and Bangalore is, of course, kind of the Silicon Valley, the high-tech development region for more modern India. Hyderabad here also has a fair number of high-tech industries, computer industries of a variety. India's industrial economy. India inherited a strong railroad system due to the infrastructure investments by Great Britain during the colonial period. One of the few things they did invest in. There's a strong industrial resource base with fossil fuels available to adequately power the industrial base, but this may be running low as populations grow significantly and rapidly. Iron ore accounts for 6% of world production within India and 5% of total world preserves. The government has constructed hydroelectric facilities to make up for shortages in commercial energy in an economy that has been carefully planned by the government, although there has been the beginning of more globalized economic activities on the privatization of some industries, especially when it comes to the high-tech IT industries. India's industrial regions. There's a diversified industrial sector emerging. The Damodar Valley near Calcutta, west of Calcutta, has dams for flood control and hydroelectric power. Of course, this is one of the areas that has the highest amounts of rainfall during the wet monsoon season. There are a number of state-run industries, metallurgy, metal fabrication, chemical manufacturing, but pollution is a major problem from older and not well-maintained facilities. The Damodar Valley is India's foremost national industrial region where coal and iron ore promoted the growth of state-owned metallurgy, machine, fertilizer, and chemical industries. It's one of the world's largest industrial regions. Calcutta benefits economically from being the capital city of the West Bengal state, but Calcutta has not attracted significant foreign investment, and much of the investment from 1995 till 2010 came from the Indian government and private domestic capital, which focused on the energy and transportation sectors rather than manufacturing. Consequently, the region may become India's Rust Belt as other areas connect with the global economy. Mumbai is the second most important industrial region. It's the capital of the Maharashtra state, has become the showcase of new and progressive India with its recent rapid economic growth. Here we find cotton textile manufacturing, automobile production, aircraft, pharmaceuticals, plastic, and chemicals. This is India's cosmopolitan city, of course formerly known as Bombay, and symbolizes the new era of national growth linked to global economy. Modern skyscrapers, hotels, and apartment buildings dot the cityscape, evidence of a highly trained workforce of professionals and entrepreneurs flush with new investment capital. The city is India's busiest international seaport and the country's primary air transport gateway. Mumbai is the headquarters of major domestic corporations, the National Stock Exchange, and the center of Hindu language film industry. The Greater Mumbai is a huge urban area of 20.5 million people and attracts much of India's foreign investment. Despite a severe decline in its huge textile industry, Mumbai still boasts a healthy industrial base and automobiles and petrochemical. But the driving force today is service industries such as telecommunications, real estate, banking, insurance, and other business services. And it's employment in these sectors that provide the basis of India's vaulted and growing middle class, connected to the global economy. New satellite suburban development, huge planned cities in the suburbs begin to eclipse the older peninsula in Mumbai, and here is where the impressive emerging landscape is developing. Despite Mumbai's prosperity, a significant slice of the city's residents are poor, rural to urban migrants, as well as those left behind by Mumbai's engagement in the global economy, which has resulted in the closing of state-owned industries here. About half the population are slum dwellers or squatters living on self-constructed shanty towns. Even in parts of the more modern developing regions, shanty settlements are interspersed between the upscale housing developments. Bangalore is the Silicon Valley of India. Here we find companies like Texas Instruments, IBM, HP, and other software firms. The city and region have been dubbed the Silicon Valley of India because of the growing presence of these domestic and foreign electronics and software production firms. The city grew from 4.1 million in 1991 to 8.5 million in 2011. The IT industry is critical to India's economic growth and has attracted largest share of foreign investment of any region in India. Traditionally anchored in state-owned defense and electronic industries, as well as science and engineering universities, this area has attracted these high-tech firms, as well as domestic computer software firms. This chart from page 436 of your text shows the increase in population total for India from the beginning of the 1900s to 2011. It shows the urban population and a change in percentage of the urban portion of the total population. We've seen in the past century, the urban population percentage has grown from 10 or 11% to 32%. The urban population has grown to about a quarter of total population, and we see, of course, the drastic increase in the population that we noted earlier during our discussion in demographics. Urban India. There are stark contrasts between urban and rural world in India. The prosperity gap has widened in the post-industrial economy. Greater levels of rural to urban migration have followed this kind of prosperity in the urban regions, but many of these people, as we've mentioned, don't have the education to participate in the economic opportunities. And this stream of urban migrants has exceeded the urban employment opportunities. The urbanization, of course, we know was low as we went into the mid-20th century, but growth indicators include the rural to urban migration and the natural increase of urban population as well. Most of the population growth in urban India is in the large cities. 35 cities are in India with more than 1 million people in population, and there are some mega cities, but not world-class cities. And these include Delhi with 17.3 million, Mumbai with 17.3 million, and Kolkata with 14.3 million. However, there's insufficient finance, insufficient transportation, and telecommunications to rate these cities as truly world-class places. India's urban poor. First and second generation rural to urban migrants see the city as a place for greater economic opportunities, but there's a lack of adequate income for many of these migrants to secure durable housing. We can say there's more than some substandard housing. Bustech or village in the city are the places in some of these larger cities where there are squatter dwellings. People live with dirt floors, cardboard houses, or cast-off construction materials. And in these regions, electricity, sewage, and water is rare. There are many people who simply live on the streets and have no dwelling at all. Well, that's it for our Chapter 9, Lecture 3, and we'll talk to you again soon.